All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning for this morning's Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation's monthly economic briefing. As always, my name is Shane Cullen. I'd now like to introduce the CEO of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, Bill Allen.
Thank you, Shane, and welcome everybody. I hope everybody watching this morning is in a good mood. How about those Dodgers back in the World Series, National League Championship winners? We got the pennant back in LA. And how about those Lakers, NBA champions? A lot to celebrate here in Los Angeles in a time when celebrations have been few and far between, and some have not even been allowed publicly. It's really important that we take moments to really celebrate these extraordinary successes by the great athletes who call Los Angeles their home. We have some other good news to celebrate, and you'll hear that from my colleagues this morning. That's that LA County saw the return of 37,000 jobs over the last month. There's port activity that's picking up in anticipation of the holiday selling season. There are a lot of encouraging signs on a number of fronts in terms of the development of therapeutics and vaccines. That all being said, let's not forget there are still 500,000 of our neighbors who've not yet regained their employment lost to the pandemic. Let's not forget that we're moving into the fall and winter season. LA has a huge advantage in fighting this virus and keeping our economy going in that we are a warm weather climate throughout the fall and much of the winter. So our al fresco dining options will remain available to us. And as long as we all keep each other safer at work, we should be able to keep that segment of our economy open. But I emphasize, as long as we all keep each other safer at work. The LAEDC is developing a campaign with our partners at Los Angeles County, particularly in the Workforce Development, Aging, and Community Services Department, using CARES Act funding to encourage a public ethic of keeping each other safe at work. Whether we're employers, employees, or patrons of businesses, we all have a role to play. It's simple stuff: wearing our mask, keeping our distance, washing our hands. If we do this carefully, really diligently in the weeks and months ahead, we can help more of our neighbors get back to work. We can keep our economy going, we can slow the spread of the virus, and we can get through this to the other side when in 2021, all signs indicate that we're going to have a lot of medical interventions that will really help us battle and ultimately defeat this virus. So as I say, I'm in a pretty good mood today. I hope you all are too. You're going to hear some encouraging numbers, but also some cautions about the role each and every one of us has to play. All of you who are with us today have connections to the LAEDC in one way or another. You are stewards of this regional economy with us, and we want each of you to be ambassadors for that specific campaign and for the general need to remember it is our most vulnerable neighbors who've been impacted most greatly, disproportionately by this pandemic, from a health perspective, from an economic and employment perspective. And we owe it to each and every one of our neighbors to do everything we can as individuals and organizations to help them get back on their feet, to help them get back into employment, to help their struggling businesses survive, reinvent themselves, so that they can prosper in the new economy that has been so significantly changed by the course of this pandemic. So with that set up, let me turn the platform over to my colleague Shannon Sedgwick, who's our director of our Institute for Applied Economics. She's going to tell you a little bit about the course of the pandemic and the current case counts and progression of the health side of this, as well as an update on the employment numbers in the region by sector. And then her colleague, Tyler LaFerriere, who's our associate economist, will talk about the real estate industry, residential, commercial, office, retail, and have, I think, some interesting insights into what the real estate impacts that have obviously been significant. So Shannon, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning. Thank you for joining the LAEDC for today's monthly economic briefing. I hope you and your families are continuing to keep healthy and to follow social distancing guidelines as we continue to make our way through the pandemic. The latest local employment numbers for Los Angeles were just released, covering the month of September, and I'll be going over those numbers today. But first, let's take stock of where we currently stand with the number of COVID-19 cases. We are now in the second half of October, which marks 7 months since the Safer at Home order was issued in response to the COVID-19 health crisis. Los Angeles County has been stuck at the most restrictive tier of the 4-tier reopening plan, which was issued on August 28th. California's blueprint for a safer economy uses risk-based criteria to dictate the tightening and loosening of allowable activities and the length of time between those changes to evaluate how movement from tier to tier is impacting the trajectory of the disease. Every county in California is assigned to a tier based on its test positivity and adjusted case rate. As of October 15th, LA County is still classified as Tier 1 when the higher risk of community disease transmission is considered widespread. LA County remains in this tier due to an adjusted case rate of more than 7 daily new cases per 100,000 people. In Tier 1, capacity restrictions are more severe than in lower risk counties classified in Tiers 2 through 4. We see that only 3 counties in the Southern California region are still in Tier 1, Los Angeles County, its neighbor, San Bernardino County, and Imperial County. In these counties, many non-essential indoor business operations, they're still closed, with others such as movie theaters, places of worship, fitness centers, and restaurants restricted to operating outside. Non-essential offices are encouraged to stay remote while in Tier 1. In order for LA County to move to Tier 2, the adjusted daily case rate must fall to between 4 and 7 daily new cases per 100,000 people. As of October 13th, the rate in the county was 7.6 daily new cases per 100,000 people. The county must meet Tier 2's criteria for 2 consecutive weeks. And if it's successful in progressing to less restrictive tiers in the future, but then the metrics worsen for 2 consecutive weeks, it will be assigned back to a more restrictive tier. K through 12 specialized services have opened in some school districts and at some private schools in the county. However, in the first tier, school campuses cannot fully reopen for all students. Once LA County is officially in the second tier, it must then stay in that tier for 2 more weeks before schools can fully reopen for all students. And any setbacks during that time could restart the clock. This means school campuses might not reopen until late November or even beyond that if high infection rates continue. LA Unified and Long Beach Unified school districts, the 2 largest school districts in the county, are both being very cautious in allowing all students to return, with the latter, Long Beach, ruling out a general reopening before January, regardless of which tier we may be in by then. One of the uncertainties that will impact the trajectory of recovery is the possibility of a second wave of infections during the cold and flu season. While we don't have a clear answer to whether Los Angeles County will experience a second wave or to what degree it may occur, what has been taking place globally and across the US may give us some cause for concern. Nationwide, we seem to be headed for a 3rd peak in the number of new cases. According to Johns Hopkins University, over the past 2 weeks, new cases in the US have risen from about 40,000 per day on average to more than 52,000. And for some context, we spiked at nearly 70,000 new cases per day over the summer. Globally, coronavirus infections in Europe set records last week, overtaking the number of cases in the US per capita. And while California and Los Angeles County aren't currently following the trend, the more the virus spreads in other areas and the more lax people become about social distancing measures due to pandemic fatigue, the higher the likelihood that we will see a rise in the number of new cases here too, which may once again lead to additional restrictions to mitigate the spread of the virus. Moving backwards during the recovery process will have severe economic consequences, as it wreaks havoc on businesses already trying to keep their doors open and households who are struggling with unemployment. Before we move on to the employment situation, let's take a look at where we stand with COVID-19 cases in Los Angeles County. As of Sunday, the LA County Department of Public Health reported over 288,000 positive cases of COVID-19 across LA County, with close to 6,900 deaths. 74% of COVID-related deaths have occurred in residents over the age of 65. There are currently 746 people hospitalized with COVID-19, of which 24% are in the ICU. 93% of the people who have died from COVID-19 had underlying health conditions. And remember, these underlying conditions aren't necessarily obscure. They're high blood pressure, diabetes. So health officials are recommending that everyone get a flu shot this year in the hopes that they can avoid a surge of hospital demand that could result from a concurrent epidemics of influenza and COVID-19. As of last Thursday, the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health announced the 7-day average for new cases of COVID-19 reached 819. Residents between the ages of 30 and 49 years old continue to have the highest number of new daily cases among all age groups. In LA County, the cohort represents 34% of all cases, and the second highest are residents between the ages of 18 and 29 years old, with 25% of all cases. LA County has to meet several indicators established by the state which determine the county's progress in slowing the spread of COVID-19 and their reopening approach. These indicators, which, as I mentioned, include test positivity and case rate adjusted according to testing volume, help assign that county in one of those 4 tiers, each with an established reopening framework. Currently, the testing measure is not being met in LA County. The target is an average of at least 15,000 tests done each day over the past 7 days. Over the last week, the average was under 14,000. Additionally, the adjusted case rate in LA County is still above 7 new cases per 100,000 people. So it must fall below that for a period of 2 weeks to qualify for the second tier. With continued restrictions, we are still experiencing high levels of unemployment with a very significant number of people without jobs. The number of workers receiving unemployment benefits remains disturbingly high. According to the latest data, the California EDD has processed approximately 15.2 million claims since the pandemic began in mid-March through the regular UI program, reopened and extension claims, as well as the separate pandemic unemployment assistance program. Total unemployment benefits paid to California workers during the COVID-19 pandemic has now hit $101 billion in just 7 months, with about $55 billion in regular state provided UI benefits. So that's more than twice what was paid in the 3 worst years of the Great Recession combined. The additional $300 to $600 in federal pandemic unemployment compensation, or FPUC, ended July 25th. Since then, an estimated $6 billion of additional benefit payments through the federal lost wages assistance program have been issued, though the program is issuing its final payment. The more than 3.4 million claimants receiving the final 6th payment will find themselves without the supplemental payment moving forward. Friday, new employment data for LA County was released covering the month of September. In September, unemployment sat at 15.1% in Los Angeles County. Payroll employment was hardest hit in March and April, with the unemployment rate reaching April and May, with the unemployment rate reaching over 20% each month. Since then, the employment situations continue to improve. September is the 4th consecutive month the change in LA County's unemployment rate was positive. It fell by 1.3 percentage points from August, though it is still 10.8 percentage points higher than September of last year. Civilian employment increased by 43,000 over the month, reaching 4.17 million in September of 2020, while unemployment decreased by 65,000 to 743,000. Unemployment almost certainly saw its worst levels in May of 2020, with the unemployment rate peaking at over 20%. However, despite rapid improvements in succeeding months, it will be difficult for unemployment to continue to fall that rapidly while the virus-related shocks continue. And this has been borne out with the pace of job growth in the US, slowing down in August and September, right in time for what a number of health experts are predicting could be, as I said, a second wave of coronavirus in the US during the traditional flu season, so which typically begins in the fall and then intensifies during winter months. We don't expect unemployment on its current course to drop below 10% again until midway through 2021, absent substantial fiscal support or sooner than estimated deployment of a vaccine en masse. Our current projections suggest that unemployment will fall from an estimated annual average of 13.8% in 2020 to an average of around 8% in 2022, meaning that we should still be feeling the impacts of this economic shock well into the future. If we experience a dramatic second wave of infections in the winter here in LA County, unemployment could easily spike again, with more local businesses failing and larger corporations continuing to downsize. From August to September, non-farm employment in Los Angeles County grew by 37,600 jobs, but job growth remains mixed across the industries. An increase of 13,300 jobs in government payrolls led month-over-month industry employment growth, with a seasonal increase in public education. Food services and drinking places added over 11,000 jobs over last month, and 3,900 jobs were added in retail trade. Healthcare and social services, social assistance, added 3,500 jobs, with most of that gain attributed to an increase in social assistance. Professional services, information, real estate, transportation and warehousing, and accommodation all reported month-over-month employment declines. While the September report showed positive changes from August, we again see that employment in LA County is still down significantly year over year. And we look at employment year over year to account for any seasonal factors. It's a comparison of what took place the same time pre-pandemic versus what's happening now. So non-farm employment has fallen by almost 437,000 jobs from September of last year. It's a decline of 9.6%. Food services and drinking places accounted for 24% of the year-over-year non-farm employment contraction, with a reduction of more than 104,000 jobs. Administrative and support and waste services are down 27,500 jobs from last year, with the decline driven by a drop of 19,500 jobs in employment services. While the finance and insurance and utilities industries showed a slight uptick in the number of jobs over last year, every other remaining industry sector reported year-over-year job reductions. We experienced the greatest job loss associated with the measures taken to mitigate the spread of the virus between March and April, when more than 716,000 jobs fell off county non-farm payrolls. Since then, we've added close to 30% of those jobs back as we've gone through the phased reopening process, experiencing a minor setback in July when the governor issued an order for a second round of mandated closures for certain types of businesses due to a spike in the number of cases in LA County related to reopening. If we compare the number of jobs lost in the two hardest hit months of March and April with the change in the number of jobs since, we can gain some insight into which industries are adding those jobs back to their payrolls and which ones aren't. We have a diverse economic base here in Los Angeles County, and each is experiencing recovery differently. As with any situation, there are winners and losers, but the majority of industries find themselves in the in-between, adding some portion of the jobs lost during March and April back in subsequent months. Here we have the share of jobs lost and then added for a selection of industries in Los Angeles County. They're ranked in this chart by the most numbers of jobs lost in March and April. As of September, food services and drinking places recovered 44% of the 185,000 jobs lost in March and April. Manufacturing recovered nearly half of the 45,000 jobs lost, and construction recovered just over 75% of the 21,000 plus jobs lost. On the other end of the spectrum, accommodation has only recovered about 2.3% of the 22,000 jobs lost in March and April, and amusement, gambling, and recreation, which is comprised of amusement parks, casinos, and fitness centers and other recreational centers, has only added back 1.3% of the 23,000 plus jobs that have been lost in that industry. Before we move on to the next part of our webinar, Halloween is just 12 days away. Since this is the first time we are all celebrating Halloween and the Day of the Dead during a pandemic, I wanted to take a few minutes to share the restrictions in effect in Los Angeles County. No indoor or outdoor gatherings are permitted in order to reduce the number of people from different households who come into contact with each other. Door-to-door and trunk-or-treating is allowed, but not recommended. The county recommends a number of activities that do adhere to social distancing guidelines, including online parties and contests and vehicle-based activities such as car parades and drive-in movies. The Institute for Applied Economics is wishing you a safe and socially distanced Halloween. So if you go out, wear a scary mask and let the goosebumps spread, but not the coronavirus. Up next, we have Tyler joining us.
Thanks, Shannon. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you again this morning. This morning, we will be discussing an ever-popular conversation in Southern California, real estate. We've heard a lot in the press since the beginning of the pandemic about real and hypothesized future trends in real estate, both commercial and residential. My hope this morning is to shed some light on what is actually happening in our region, what has been a myth and hyperbole, and what we might realistically expect in the months and years to come as we work collectively towards recovery and being safer at work and at home. It's not a great title, I'll grant, but it sums up the big winners during this pandemic and economic crisis. For those capable of affording a single-family home in the region, they have sought to do so as homes continue to double and triple their role as offices and schools. On the commercial side, the increases in home-based consumption, especially but not limited to e-commerce, has had a dramatic effect on the increase in demand for warehousing. This has been coupled with the demands of distancing in order to keep our trade and logistics workers safe. As such, if you hear the word house, either as the word or in the word, it's an anchor of stability in the real estate markets, if not a net beneficiary from the current trends in household and business activity. Starting our investigation of the residential side of real estate markets, the upward march of median home prices remains relatively unabated. Across the region, prices are high and are getting higher, including in the Inland Empire, where median prices breached $400,000 in San Bernardino County in September. As of this time last year, we were talking about how price constraints were finally having an impact on demand, such that price increases were slowing, if not reversing. That is no longer the case. As of this summer, and as was widely publicized, those households who could afford a down payment did so. Year-over-year prices have increased and now once again climbed into double-digit territory in the more suburban areas of Ventura and Riverside counties, a trend not seen since 2014. In terms of the number of homes being sold, volumes have largely recovered from the slump in the spring. And in both Orange County and the Inland Empire, those volumes have exceeded longer-term post-recession trends. Though I'm not ringing a bell portending the end of urbanity and a renaissance in the suburbs, our suburban counties are certainly benefiting on the residential real estate side. Looking at housing supplies, inventories, which have been relatively stable, if not on the upswing pre-pandemic, have tightened and are likely to get tighter in the near term. Again, this is particularly true of the Inland Empire and the OC, but LA County is also feeling a supply squeeze. Given policy emphasis on multifamily residences to meet our overall housing shortages and longer-term concerns about suburban sprawl into an increasingly large fire zones, inventories may recover somewhat in response to demand, but will likely remain relatively tight going forward. On the affordability side, things look remarkably stable despite the economic crisis. This may be a minor illusion, however, and may tell us the following. Those who could afford a home pre-pandemic are still able to do so, but those who could not still cannot, and may increasingly be incapable of even fathoming home ownership, at least in our region. This is due to the fact that the pandemic has exacerbated many pre-pandemic trends in the growing divisions between high-skill and high-income Southern California households and low-income and low-skill households. Finally, on the rental side, Southern California has not seen the same dramatic reversal of rents as the Bay Area and other localities. While rents have flattened in the LAOC area, they have not fallen. While some may be leaving Los Angeles and Orange County, it appears they may not be going far. Indeed, rents have continued to climb in Ventura and the Inland Empire, and there are data that would suggest that we are still receiving high-skilled newcomers from the eastern United States. Having concluded our discussion on the residential real estate side, let's now turn our attention to the commercial end of things. Looking first at office space in Greater LA, things still look fairly bleak, but there may be some rays of sunshine poking through the clouds. Vacancy rates are near 15%, absorption continues to struggle, but leases have flattened rather than fallen. For the time being, subleasing has prevailed, but CBRE forecasts that leases might start to fall somewhat in 2021, while vacancies remain elevated but stable. Industrial real estate has also struggled in Greater LA, both for pandemic-related reasons and due to a collapse in port activity in the spring. This has naturally been reflected in a contraction in new supply, but vacancies appear to be stabilizing, if not declining, as we slowly recover. Port volumes recover as well, and some of our local manufacturers have successfully retrofitted their operations to meet pandemic-related demands. Retail in Greater LA is likely the most vulnerable aspect of local commercial real estate markets and will continue to struggle while restrictions remain on retail-related activities and tourism remains depressed. Vacancies are elevated and are expected to increase in the near term. Leases have fallen and will likely continue to fall, and construction has slowed and if not been delayed. While it is possible that some retailers will be able to take advantage of this market and try to expand, especially to meet distancing requirements, this will likely remain the most depressed element of the commercial real estate markets until we have a vaccine or viable treatment options. The office outlook in Orange County is somewhat bleaker than Greater LA, especially since Orange County has a much higher concentration of technical and professional services firms that likely have a greater ability to use telework capabilities. This is reflected in falling rents, increased vacancy, increased subleases, and depressed absorption rates. The transition to telework has also likely slowed the movement of some businesses from LA to Orange County in search of cheaper offices and commercial real estate. Industrial real estate in Orange County is a bit of a happier story, especially as port volumes have recovered in the last several months and e-commerce remains elevated. Indeed, construction completions were actually higher than in 2019, signaling that Orange County is benefiting from space being at a premium in these times where online retailers are needing to keep inventories high and distancing is a requirement. Unlike Orange County, the story of office real estate in the Inland Empire is a bit more mixed. Rents are actually somewhat elevated, and although vacancies appear to be on the uptick, this may be because construction of new office space is still high as well. Indeed, the Inland Empire may be better poised to recover than other parts of the region for one reason. It has the physical room to recover. Overall, the IE has managed to cut unemployment by roughly 5% since the height of the crisis in the summer, and hiring in health, education, local government, trade, and retail trade are all positive, if not strong. Finally, industrial real estate is similarly stable, if not strong, in Riverside and San Bernardino. Since these data are from Q2, the trends are reflecting the summer slowdown at the ports. However, those volumes have started to recover, and so too have trade and retail jobs. This will likely be reflected in the real estate data in Q3, but even Q2 rates remain relatively stable and vacancies only marginally above trends and have been on the upswing since 2019, due in part to the large deliveries of new space. To conclude, the story in real estate is mixed, but certainly not a disaster, nor portents of the death of the urban core, as some media have implied, if not asserted. While some are undoubtedly leaving Los Angeles and Southern California, this move may only be to Ventura, Orange, and the Inland Empire, if not elsewhere nearby in Southern California, continuing and reinforcing longer-term trends. This is reflected in the single-family home data and rental increases in areas outside of Los Angeles. On the commercial side, industrial has been recovering. With regard to offices, it may be too early to tell. As we continue to work on being safer at work, it will make all the difference on how much we continue to work remotely to the same degree. In the near term, the difference between 90 to 95% telework, depending on our field and job title, will have a significant ramification on office space demand and how far away we will be able to live from the office. As always, we at the LAEDC continue to learn with you as we adjust to our new reality, and we will continue to share with you our evolving insights. Again, a pleasure to be with you this morning, and Bill, Shannon, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for those great presentations. We'll now dive into some Q&A. First question we'll go with Shannon. This may be directed towards you. What are some policies that could help or hinder our economic recovery?
Well, moving forward, the LA County economy faces significant challenges in its recovery, including a large number of business closures, the ending of the supplemental unemployment benefits, which was propping up consumer spending, and an impending wave of evictions and foreclosures once moratoriums end and residents don't have the means to pay their rent or mortgage arrears. Metro areas with higher rents and imposing stricter guidelines for small businesses throughout the last 7 months, like Los Angeles, they've experienced more closures. Going into the pandemic, 93% of businesses here were small businesses with less than 20 employees. As the disruption related to the pandemic continues, we lose more businesses, which means there are less places for people to work, and this may slow the trajectory of recovery. We have a large number of low-wage workers in industries such as hospitality, tourism, and entertainment that were decimated by the pandemic and who are finding it difficult, if not near impossible, to find other employment. We still have a significant number, nearly 100,000 unrecovered restaurant jobs. And a majority of these workers, many of whom were minimum wage, hourly or contract or temporary workers, they were ill-prepared financially to weather the disruption of this degree for this long. So one of the ways this can be addressed is through another supplemental benefit payment for those receiving unemployment. The additional $300 to $600 in federal, pandemic unemployment compensation ended at the end of July 25th. So some of those claimants began receiving an additional $300 in additional benefit payments through the federal lost wages program, but that was only temporary. So the sixth final payment that's been issued, and not all claimants who were receiving the $600 benefit were eligible for that LWA program. So we have a high cost of living here in LA County, and we have a significant number of people who are unemployed. So individuals receiving unemployment benefits, they now cap out at $450 a week, which is about $1,800 per month in an area where the median rent is roughly $2,500 per month. And a median mortgage payment, assuming a 10% down payment and using the latest median price from CAR for August, is about close to $4,000, $3,900 per month. So the inability of these unemployed households to pay their bills, the drastic cut in spending that will be required of them to make ends meet on so little in a high cost area will have a ripple effect and put additional pressure on businesses who are already operating on reduced revenues. So while there was some controversy surrounding that additional PUC benefit, what it was doing is propping up consumer spending and keeping at bay some of those secondary effects associated with having so many people out of work. I think AB 3088, the Tenant, Homeowner, and Small Landlord Relief and Stabilization Act, was a step in the right direction, offering some protection to tenants and small landlords, but consideration might be given to providing additional emergency liquidity for those who will struggle even with repayment plans under AB 3088. Also, since both landlords, many of whom are small business owners, and tenants are suffering, it'd be great if we could find solutions, including technology-based platforms that are available where tenants and landlords work together to co-develop payment schedules, such as individualized payment plans based on actual tenant cash flows that help tenants stay current on rent and weather their current unforeseen circumstances outside of the no-win eviction process. We went through a wave of evictions and foreclosures in the Great Recession. And I think most of you remember that it wasn't pretty and that the situation gives rise to a more dramatic economic decline. With the budget shortfalls occurring at the state and local level, I'm really concerned decisions might be made to solve some budgetary problems in the short term without proper consideration given to the long-term consequences that these changes in policy may bring about. Meaning we have to be careful about what we put on the chopping block in terms of our existing tax break and incentive programs. For example, here in Los Angeles County, the California Film and Tax Credit has buoyed up this industry by slowing the exodus that was taking place to competing regions with tax credits and other incentives, both domestically and abroad, and by attracting additional television production to make up for the feature film activity we've lost to other competing jurisdictions. So not to mention this tax credit is fiscally accretive. For every dollar of film credit appropriated, it returns $1.11 to state and local tax coffers, according to a report that we issued in 2012. So legislators would in effect be cutting off their noses to spite their faces if they were to give in to any pressure to do away with this all-important tax credit. Moreover, the motion picture and television industry is one of the key industries in our region, employing a large number of workers across the skill spectrum, including a large number of gig workers. It serves as a draw for people and businesses alike looking to be a part of the industry. And we have supporting industries that have built up here because of this activity, like supporting tech firms, rental companies, and craft services. And the industry, the purchases it makes in its supply chain and household spending of employees, it contributes a significant amount of tax revenue to the state and local government. So there's a reason why other areas continue to try to poach this particular business away from us. So we have to really consider the choices we make when we're looking to find money in a dire situation. And
Absolutely.
that
Bill,
was long, sorry.
no worries. That was great. Bill or Tyler, would you like to add?
I think that was a very comprehensive response to we get asked frequently. Thank you, Shannon. That was terrific. A lot of food thought there.
The only thing I'd reinforce is that households do need emergency liquidity right now for housing costs right now. I mean, the city of Los Angeles very valiantly committed $100 million in an emergency rental relief fund that was quickly exhausted. And so I think it's concomitant upon state and local government to really rethink those sorts of programs, including maybe dipping a little bit into the rainy day fund, because if this is not an emergency, I don't know what is. I would also, this is now a time for state and local government to really reflect on its revenue sources. We produced a report earlier in the pandemic really outlining where cities are getting their revenues, and a lot of them are from pro-cyclical sources related to consumption, so sales and use taxes, business licenses, fees. I think now is time to review how we get a lot of those revenues. And then thirdly, I would just say we need to ensure maximum ability and flexibility for people to work in the state. So as many ways that we can empower and create opportunities for people to work in the state of California, we need to embrace those opportunities. So.
Well, as long as we're adding on, I will add, first of all, appreciation for our county and city government who are working with our colleagues at LISC LA to get $100 million of grant capital out to small businesses in this fourth quarter. It's an extraordinary allocation of their CARES Act funding from the federal government, targeted at our most vulnerable small businesses in rounds of grant making being administered by LISC LA. And we've been promoting it through our Connectory website, but that is essential and important. And then I would also applaud our community colleges who have been stepping up to connect with businesses, to help with training, retraining, upskilling, reskilling of workers, because many of the 200,000 or so who have found their way back into employment have not necessarily found their way back to the prior job that they had, and many of them are going to need some reskilling and upskilling. Many of the nearly 500,000 of our neighbors who are still separated from their prior jobs may need reskilling or upskilling. So continued investment from our government in programs that will help upskill or reskill our workforce will be critical due to the changing nature of our economy owing to the changing consumer behaviors, shifts to different technologies, digital technologies, e-commerce, connections with consumers in the retail industry. So those would be two I would add. That tremendous commitment of our local governments to pumping resources financially into our small businesses, and our community college and other partners helping to reskill workers. Those will be particularly important to our ability to rebuild our economy.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for that very detailed answer. But I think it's a question that really has been on everybody's minds. With that, with time, I think we're actually going to go ahead and wrap it up. What I would like to suggest to everyone, as we always do, is continue to send your questions into us. We want to be there to answer your questions, especially during this time. And so please send your questions over. You can send them to my email, shane.cullen@laedc.org. It's that third bullet point there on your screen, and I will be more than happy to share that with Tyler, Shannon, Bill, or anybody else on the team that can help address your questions. And then we also always encourage you to visit the COVID-19 response page, LAEDC's COVID-19 response page, for updates and additional resources. And that can be found at laedc.org/coronavirus bullet point. And due to the upcoming holidays and the hard work of so many of our staff, we are going to be taking a little bit of a break from these webinars these next 2 months in November and December. With that said, we will be issuing kind of some recaps and summaries of the employment numbers that do come out each month. So please keep an eye out for that. But we will be rejoining you in the new year in 2021, continuing these wonderful monthly economic implications briefings. With that, thank you everybody once again for joining us today, and please enjoy your week. I'm sure we'll see you again, but until January, have a wonderful holiday.
Please do your part to keep all of us safer at work in the months ahead. Thanks, everybody.